Hello Bookbellas and fellas, Kira here, and today I'm going to be talking about every book that I read in the month of December. I think this is probably like one of the first months, aside from the Mistborn book, which I'm actually starting right now since I didn't get to it last month. So let's just get into the books that I read in the month of December. So the first book that I read in the month of December is Grave Mercy by Robin Lefevre, and I know that this sounds amazing because you get the premise for assassin nuns. And I didn't dislike this book, but it wasn't as gritty as I wanted it to be. Before Ismay was born and her mother found out that she was pregnant with her, she decided to go to an herbalist to try to abort her using a very potent poison. Well, the poison didn't work. As a result, Esme was born with a bunch of scars on her back because she was not able to be killed by the poison itself, which in the long run actually served her very well because poison does not hurt her the way it hurts other people. She can actually intake as much poison as somebody as 3 times her size and be almost completely unharmed by it. So the fact that she grew up in this circumstance means that she doesn't have to worry about coming into contact with poison and being seriously injured by it, which makes her a perfect candidate to be an assassin nun. She is then taken in to this monastery, and it's the monastery of Saint Morton, who is the god of death. So this is actually written in historical France, and so it made it very interesting. I really like the setting of it, because I don't usually read stuff that's in historical France. This is a book like that had a ton of plots going on in it and conspiracies and some action. So one of my favorite characters in this book was the love interest, which they did throw romance into this, which at first I wasn't sure how I felt about it because it kind of softened up her character. And while I really, really love Duval because he is just this really good guy, but I really ended up loving him. And I loved Delorne, who's like this really good looking friend of his, and Beast, who's like this really big burly guy, but he's like nice to every woman, like he treats them very respectfully. And I have to say that I loved Beast so much. I was not sure if I wanted to continue on with this, but I know that the next book has to do more with Beast. And so I am probably going to be continuing on with this, in spite of the fact that this wasn't my favorite read. There was some characters in here that really made the read worthwhile. I just overall did not feel like this book was very groundbreaking. It didn't really hook me steadily. I definitely went through and read it all. I didn't dislike it enough to DNF it, which I dislike very few books enough to DNF them. And so I liked this book, but I didn't absolutely love it. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars just because for an assassin nun to be so sophisticated, I get that she's probably had a decent education, but I really wanted more grittiness from this. I like grittiness with my assassins. I don't like something that kind of feels powdered up, and I felt like there was a lot of powdering with this. And so that's the reason why I gave it a 3 stars instead of a 5 stars or a 4 stars. It just didn't really hook me, and I wasn't really set on the characters. And aside from Duval, Delorne, and Beast, I wasn't really in love with the main character. Like, she was okay. I thought her premise was interesting. I thought her character was interesting, but I didn't feel like I had any kind of connection with her. So the next books that I read is I went through and I read the entire trilogy of Orange, which is a manga. I actually did thoroughly enjoy these. They all got a 4 out of 5 stars from me. The main reason I ended up rating these a 4 out of 5 stars for pretty much all of them was at the very beginning of this first one, which kind of set the mood. It overemphasized not having regrets, and it got kind of annoying a little bit because they just kept emphasizing it and emphasizing it, and I didn't feel like they really deterred from that. I mean, I kind of after the way that they emphasized it the first few times, I understood that they were trying to prevent somebody from committing suicide. Basically, these books are all about how they receive letters from their future selves who are trying to save their classmate from committing suicide after his mother had committed suicide. I really appreciate the representation they had for how when an individual knows someone that has committed suicide, there's that whole survivor's guilt that a lot of people experience after somebody kills themselves. And it's very understandable because, you have those regrets. What more could I have done? What could I have done to make this person not do this? And I really like how they had representation in here for that, because you don't really see that a lot in books themselves. And I loved that we had that kind of character to relate to, because I feel like a lot of people have known someone who has committed suicide. And so if you are very sensitive to suicide, I will put a trigger warning on this, that it does have a lot to do with trying to prevent someone from committing suicide. So it could be a big trigger for you. Overall, I really enjoyed these though. I really liked them. This last one though, like The Future, it didn't really feel super necessary to me. I mean, I didn't really feel like it really added to the main story, which is these two. And while I appreciated the extra commentary, I didn't really feel like it was super necessary for them to have this in there. While I loved these, I did end up giving them all a 4 out of 5 stars, which I still think is pretty high considering. Now in the second book, they did taper off that redundancy a little bit, but I still have to say like that overall, out of all of them, I think the first one was probably the best one in spite of the repetition that they had going on in this. So that's kind of how I feel about them. But I did really enjoy this, and if you like contemporary mangas, then these are definitely worth the read. So the next book that I read, I actually listened to an audio. It was Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I am anxiously awaiting the series with David Tennant in it because I love Doctor Who, and when he was in Doctor Who, he was my favorite Doctor, and I absolutely just loved him. He was just amazing. And so because I am just very much anticipating the Amazon series, I wanted to make sure that I had listened to the audiobook before I got into this. So the thing about this is I tried to read the physical book first, and I really liked the physical book, but it felt like it dragged a little bit too much for me. So what I ended up doing was I ended up reading this a little bit, and then I ended up falling off the bandwagon for it. And then I ended up getting an audiobook. And honestly, the guy that did the audiobook had kind of a Scottish accent. And so when he did Crowley, which is who David Tennant was playing, it kind of reminds me of what David Tennant sounds like when he has that accent. So the audiobook was definitely the way to go for me. I don't think I would have finished this had it been the physical copy, because I tried, but overall the story was really interesting to me. I actually ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This was kind of a satire. Think of The Omen, like with the Antichrist and everything, and think about what would happen if they had lost track of him and let him grow up as a natural human being instead of preparing him to become the Antichrist and kind of ruin all of humanity. And so this is kind of like a comedy, and it is really hilarious. And the hilarity is in the details. So basically, after they talked about the road to hell was paved with good intentions, they said, footnote, the road to hell is actually paved with salesmen. And it was hilarious, but they threw a lot of little details in this like that, and that was one of the most prominent ones that I remember from it, and it was hilarious. The reason why I ended up giving this 4 stars out of 5 stars is because out of all the characters, the main ones I was really interested in was Crowley, who was the demon, and Arazaphel, who was the angel, and they were both people that had grown up on Earth and had been on Earth for thousands of years and loved humanity. And so they were not looking to see it end. So they were actually trying to figure out a way to keep the Antichrist from destroying humanity and creating Armageddon. And they were working together. But they had to pretend that they weren't working together. Honestly, I really had a very good time listening to this on audiobook. So if you think you might struggle with it being slower paced, I do recommend the audiobook for this one. The next book that I read is Dear Ijeweli, or A Feminist Manifesto and 15 Suggestions by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I don't know if I said that right, but we're just going to go with it. So I read this book, and this is a very tiny little book, and I found it to be very empowering, and it was a very quick read, about 65, 70 pages worth of content, but it's very quick, and it gave me a very good summary of what feminism was about. Basically, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is writing a letter to her friend who has requested suggestions on how to raise her daughter, who she's pregnant with, as a feminist. And this does a very good job of kind of covering a lot of those bases. One of the instances is as far as example I go, for what they talk about female misogyny, which is a thing. And I wasn't I've heard people girls say, oh, I'm not a feminist before, it's a bad thing, which kind of downplays feminism. Extra talking about female misogyny, and then also how if you have a problem with X, which is the variable X and women, but not X and men, then you have a problem with women and not the X variable itself. So there was like a lot of like little tidbits in this that I could take away, and I just felt very empowered by this, and I actually ended up loving this so much I actually ran out and bought her Americana book, which is a nonfiction book that she wrote, because I've heard a lot of good things about that one as well. And then I also ended up getting her other book, We Should All Be Feminists, because I just love this so much, and I wanted to try out a couple of her other books, which is on the way still. I still haven't received it. I think I'm just going to love just as much as this one. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for a really empowering little book to read that's quick, I do highly recommend this one. The next book that I did read is The Amazing, Fantastic, Incredible Stan Lee, A Marvelous Memoir. I did do a full review on this, so I will leave a link in the top if you are interested in hearing more about this. This is a memoir written by Stan Lee, and it's illustrated by Peter David and Colleen Doran. This is an incredible book, and it had a lot more information than just his life becoming a comic book writer. And it kind of talked a little bit about the process and the evolution of the comic book industry, and like how some of the extraneous factors that were going on in history at this time also inspired him to come up with these very notable Marvel characters. I absolutely love this. I love this so much. If you are a fan of Stan Lee, or you want to know more about comic books, or you like comic books in general, this is such a great read. And it's really not that long. It's like about 200 pages, and it's all comic book based, which is really fitting considering the fact that Stan Lee did comic books his whole life. So I did end up also giving this a 5 out of 5 stars because I loved it so much. And I do recommend checking this out if you either like Stan Lee or his comic book characters, or just like comic books in general, because apparently like he had a hand in a lot of things that I didn't even realize he had a hand in. It was just a great read. So the next book that I read is Enchanters from the Stars. This is one of my most anticipated reads that I was going to read this last month in the month of December, and I'm really glad that I got to it. At first I thought this was a middle grade, but it's not, actually a YA book. And it was written originally in the 1970s. I didn't realize like that because I guess I had gotten a new cover, but it was really well done. So this is actually a book told in 3 different perspectives. You have Elena, who's part of an ancient race that uses science to invoke telekinesis and cytokinesis in all of its people. And they're going to a different planet called Aldrisha to help the younglings. And the only reason they call them younglings is because they are a race that's much younger than they are. Elena's race is very ancient. They're anthropologists, and they help protect and preserve these cultures that are still trying to catch up to them, that still have thousands of years before they will ever see any kind of technology or be able to advance to any kind of technology that Elena's people have been able to advance to. Well, this planet of Aldrisha is being invaded by these Imperials who are looking to colonize it. And so they are kind of messing with the natives, and they are taking their land, and they're planning, and these Imperials are planning on putting them into a reserve. This was a really creatively done book because you have 3 different perspectives. You have Elena's, who is a very modern perspective and very futuristic. So when she talks about things, it feels like it's a science fiction book. When you have Goran, who is a native Aldrician, talk, it's like have an older English tinge to how he's talking. And so it kind of really does amplify like the fact that he is an older race and he is considered a youngling. And he's also the son of a turnip farmer. Well, when it's told from his perspective, because all of the science is completely above his knowledge base, it feels like it is a fantasy novel. And he actually sees Elena as an enchantress instead of an alien from a different world. So that was also another very interesting aspect of it. It kind of bended my mind that maybe like when we read fantasy, maybe it's just a higher level of science fiction. And so I really like this. This was a very slow burn, and it wasn't a book that I couldn't put down because I did a few times, but I honestly will say that this is a book that I could not stop thinking about. And I feel like it's going to be a book that's going to really stick with me in the years to come because it was just so honestly different than anything I've ever read before. And then you also have the third perspective, who's Jarrell, and he's actually a physician for the Imperials that are invading. And he does not agree with what the Imperials are doing. He does not like how they are treating these people. He thinks that it's barbaric and he doesn't like it at all, but there's really nothing he can do about it. So he's kind of like the humanitarian, and he's kind of, observing all of this terrible stuff. When I think about this book, I feel like the person like that, our civilization, as far as how far along we are, aside from like the interspace travel that we can relate to, is probably Jarrell. I feel like he's more like us than the other two, like more as far as like technologically speaking goes, advancement. So I felt like he was probably the most relatable. But as far as story arc, I think I really liked Elena's and Goran's character arc a little bit more, but it's only because like of that alternating viewpoint of being fantasy fantasy and science fiction. I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 5 stars just because of the fact like that it wasn't unputdownable. I ended up still rating it so high because of like those alternating viewpoints, and also because it felt very timeless as well. It didn't feel like it was written back in the 1970s, and it didn't feel like it was outdated. So I mean, this is a great book. Like, I would definitely recommend this. It was everything that I wanted it to be and more. And so I just really appreciated that about it. The last book that I got to was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I actually didn't read this version. On Christmas Day, I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to be able to get to this one because of all of the booktube videos that I had done at the beginning of the month kind of like just exhausted me. And I was really worried that I was not going to be able to get to this one. And lo and behold, I was able to get to it on Christmas Day. Audible had a sale. It was on their deal of the day, and it was A Christmas Carol narrated by Tim Curry. And I love Tim Curry, but I love his voice and how expressive it was. And so it was about 3.5 hour long audiobook, which made it very easy because I could, listen to it while I was in the car and everything. And I did get through it. And I have to say like that I really, really love this. I mean, there was definitely like a lot of differences between this and the movies that I've seen. It had a lot more to it. I really loved how he spoke and how he pronunciated. It's not like he made the characters sound super distinct, like he kind of made them sound a little bit distinct, but because of the way it was written, it didn't really make a huge difference as far as not being able to determine who is speaking. It's definitely the classic that I wanted to get to for the Christmas season. I'm really happy I was able to get to it. I ended up rating it a 5 out of 5 stars. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, hit the little like, hit subscribe, and hit the little bell icon if you want to receive emails every time I post so that you'll never miss a video. I'm also on Twitter, Goodreads, Instagram, and Amazon. So if you would like to follow me on there as well, you guys can go down to the description below, and I do have links for all of those other social media contacts that I am at in my description. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys like this video, and I will see you guys again very soon.